Hello, hello! Welcome to my next live stream. So this is live stream 3, where I'm going to continue working through the case study investigation report and prepare for the session that I'll be leading at the Cranfield University on their safety investigation course. Now, there is a delay between what comes out of my mouth and what comes out of your speakers, and it's about 30 seconds. So if you do write something in the chat, and it'd be fantastic if you did, write in the chat, let me know where you're watching from. And of course, let me know what questions you have about STAMP, STPA or CAST, about this case study. And of course, if you've got some experience that you'd like to share, that would be fantastic as well. So let's get stuck in then. Let's get to the case study. Right, slides, large Miro. Is this working? There we go, look at that, fantastic, it's working. I think I've got some sound. It says sound is coming out. So again, please type in the chat if you can hear me. It gives me some assurance that the system is working properly. Fantastic, so this is the investigation report we are going to be working through. This is the final report for the Garuda Indonesia flight GA152 accident that occurred in September 1997. Essentially, this was a controlled flight into terrain type accident, and we're going to explore this. Now, in terms of where we got up to, we got through the entirety of section 1, which is the factual information. So all the way through, let's have a look, survival aspects, fire, additional information, GPWS. So that's what we spoke about. The last thing we spoke about last time was about the ground proximity warning system, GPWS. So that is all the way over here. That's where we got to. So we were talking about this last time, and we were talking about the Garuda Aircraft Operations Manual, the emergency procedures, which is in Appendix H, which is down below, and they essentially talk about how to escape from that situation. Now, I'm not going to look at that right now. We're going to move into section 2 and come back to the appendices at the end. So section 2 is essentially the analysis section. So we're going to be going through the analysis that these investigators documented in the investigation report, and then we'll use that as a source of information to build the control structure model and identify contributory control actions. So let's get stuck in. Let's get a nice pen. So section 2 is about 15 pages, 13 pages approximately. So we probably should get through it this afternoon. But if not, I'll do another live stream and we'll keep going. Yeah, so this is the next largest section. So let's have a look then. Let's get it on the screen so everyone can see it. So hello to my viewers, I can see you there lurking. Please comment below, let me know what you're interested in and if there's anything I can help you with. So then, analysis then. Evidence from the flight deck and cockpit voice recorders indicated that the aircraft was in controlled flight until it struck the trees at the top of the ridge. Consequently, this may be categorized as a controlled flight into terrain accident. There we go. Even though the condition of the wreckage did not allow complete examination of the flight control system, FDR data showed that the aircraft was being manoeuvred up to its initial right-hand wing impact with the tree. From this and the distribution of the aircraft parts, it can be concluded that the aircraft was structurally intact up to the initial impact. FDR data also indicated that the engines were operating at the time of initial impact, and therefore loss of power is not a contributing factor to the accident. The following chapters discuss other aspects that contributed to the occurrence of events preceding the initial impact with the tree. So section 2.2, Polonia Airport Operations. There were two conditions that had increased the risk and complexity in the traffic management common practice at Polonia Airport, Medan, i.e. reciprocal runway operation and airport operation during reduced visibility. Reciprocal runway operation. The Medan Airport configuration is a single runway configuration without a parallel taxiway. That's interesting. If you're thinking about the Tenerife disaster at the small airport that those aircraft were operating, that was a single runway with a kind of parallel taxiway, but it was jammed up with lots of aircraft in low visibility conditions. This was a low visibility, reduced visibility condition situation. I'm not saying that, this is the same thing. I'm just saying, the control structure for Tenerife probably existed here as well. Just have a think about that. Okay, we've got 5 people now. Fantastic. Hi, everybody. As I said, please comment below. Oh, it's gone back to 4 again. Okay, fair enough. One day we'll have at least 10. Okay, the apron location is close to the beginning of runway 23, hence runway 05 is most suitable for landings, while runway 23 is mostly preferred for takeoff. This is considered safe for operation during visual meteorological conditions. Considered safe. So who considers that? Is there a safety case or a safety assessment that justifies that? At the time of the accident, despite the prevailing IMC, instrument meteorological conditions. Considered safe for operation during visual meteorological conditions. So you can see. At the time of the accident, despite the prevailing instrument meteorological conditions, the controller activated both directions. Okay. That's interesting. So if it just for a moment, just bear with me, thinking about what is a control action. That's a potential control action, or it is a control action. The controller has activated airport operations in both directions despite the prevailing IMC. So is that something that we might want to consider as part of the investigation? If it is, we would clearly model the controller, whoever they are or whatever the organisation is. We'd explore why that control action is provided. What is the process model? What is the feedback that particular controller has? What are the control actions from above, perhaps, or information or other coordinating controllers which we might want to consider? And I am thinking that probably is something that we're going to have to look at later on. This was due to avoid delays in takeoff or landing as a result of a single direction runway operation. Reciprocal runway operations may result in head-on conflict in traffic and may create a hazard to air safety. Okay, so that's quite important, I think. We've got a comment from Fahad. Hi Fahad, great to see you. Thank you for coming along. You're most welcome. It's a genuine pleasure to serve. And as I say, if you do have any questions or comments, please stick them in the chat and we'll get to them as we're moving along. So Polonia Airport operation during reduced visibility. At the time of the accident, weather reports and interviews revealed that the horizontal surface visibility was about 500 meters. So that's quite... when you're moving around as fast as these aircraft travel and take off and land, 500 meters doesn't last very long. Median area was covered with stratocumulus clouds. Cloud base was 1,500 feet and visibility was reported between 400 to 500 meters due to smoke. So the cloud base was low as well as there was smoke. The weather condition in the vicinity of the crash site was presumably the same as the actual weather report for Polonia Airport. Based on meteorological station report for landing QAM, during the last 2 hours, 4 times QAM, from 5:30 to 0700 UTC, ground visibility at Polonia Airport was between 400 to 500 meters. There we go. According to the Director General of Air Communications decree, that's the procedure that we spoke about last time. So I'll just quickly zoom out. So when we were talking about this topic yesterday, where is it? Yeah, there we go. It says the Indonesian government, they provide this this thing called a SCEP decree, should I say, decree. And it essentially says the runway may be closed when weather is under minima. So there's the may. there, look. So it's not a mandatory thing, which is interesting. You know, why would it make sense for the Indonesian government, the Director General of Air Communications? In fact, I'll just stick them there just to make Director General of Air Communications. There we go. So they're involved in that interaction. Why would it make sense for them to set a limitation like that? Fantastic. Right, let's just zoom out and go back to where we were. So we're down here. So according to the Director General of Air Communications decree, if the visibility is 800 metres or less, so let's get a pen on that, see if you can see it, 800 metres or less. See if my mouse writing is any good. The airport authority, so they are a controller, may close the airport. So they may close the airport. At the time of the accident, the Polonia airport was not closed for operations. So from a control structure perspective, just thinking about the airport operations as the control process, the airport authority is in charge of those operations, and their decision not to close the airport would be something that the investigation should explore. So I'm just going to quickly build a mini control loop of that, just to sort of get the juices flowing a little bit. So let's steal this one here, copy, let's go over here, we'll zoom in there, stick it there, paste. Right, let's have a look at this then. So let's just delete the feedback, and in fact what we should do, make this a bit more space, there we go, that'll do. Right, so let's make a little control loop. So I refer to a control loop as a jigsaw piece. As a bit of a metaphor, and the reason I do that is because it's a key part of one of the key sort of concepts of what STAMP is all about. And so if you remember the jigsaw piece and how that fits together, you'll be able to use that as part of the work that you're doing. So in this case, we've got the airport authority. That's if I can spell today. Authority, and then they've got the airport operations. So in this context, I'm saying that airport operations is the controlled process of the airport authority, and they have the ability to provide a control action, which is to close, open the airport. Now, of course, their decision making, their control algorithm needs to be based on what the visibility is. So in this case, they need to know what the visibility is. So they need some kind of feedback, visibility. And of course, if they're going to make decisions, that decision will be based on the visibility. So if that decree says anything that's 800 or less, close the airport, and the visibility was less than 800, then why would it make sense for them not to close the airport? Now, of course, we're only in section 2 of the document, so we're going to get to that. But I'm just hoping that you'll grasp from this that when you're doing an investigation with this method, using STAMP, using STPA, using CAST, and thinking about it through the concept of this loop, control loop, as a jigsaw piece in a broader control structure, you can start asking some really powerful questions and using that to help shape your investigation, if that makes sense. So Christoph, he's saying something. Good to see you, Christoph. Thank you for contributing. If it is low traffic, no issue. Fantastic. Under such weather condition, there had been discussions between Medan Airport. Oh, no, I don't want red. There have been discussions between Medan Airport Authority, so that's this one, and several air operators to decide whether the condition was below weather minima. Nevertheless, until the accident occurred, the closure of the runway was not decided. Okay, so it's good that they were talking about it, but what is the decision-making process? Who or what is involved in that? Who is ultimately responsible? Is somebody responsible for making the decision, but they don't necessarily have, the power or resources to fulfill that responsibility. Maybe that's something we should be mindful of looking through this. Until the time of the accident, there was no action or information from the airport authority on the closing of the runway for takeoff or landing. The operation continued as if it was normal, despite the fact the visibility was 500 metres as compared to the minima of 800 metres. Whenever aerodrome is under weather minima, the appropriate airport authority has the right to close the runway based on that guidance. Interesting. Okay. So if we were doing an investigation, we'd use this small control loop to go and ask those questions. You know, we know that they didn't close the airport. That's the contributory. Well, it could be a contributory control action to this accident, or it could just be, you know, a control action that happened on the day and hasn't resulted in an accident. So, you know, we could go and ask those questions. Why would it make sense for them not to close the airport when the visibility is below minimum? What's going on there? What's the mindset behind it? Okay, so dispatching practices then. Let's talk about that. Let's make it a bit bigger so you can see it. Because, you know, I don't know if you're watching this on your mobile phone, you know, a small screen, you want to be able to see the text. So let's have a look. The flight dispatcher's duties and responsibilities are outlined in the basic operation manual. I think we talked about that the other day. Let's just have a quick jump over here. So we talked about the flight dispatcher, didn't we? There we go, flight dispatcher there, look. And the operation manual, there we go, that's what we wanted. So we've got that information over there, that's good. Let's have a look. In general, the flight dispatcher duty is to assist the pilot in command under a joint responsibility in flight preparation and to provide the relevant flight information required. So there is a control action related to flight preparation in support of the pilot in command, so there's a feedback loop between the two. And then of course there's the provision of relevant flight information, so they have to collect that information and pass that accordingly in a timely fashion. The interview with the dispatcher revealed that the pilot in command arrived at the dispatch room a few minutes after the co-pilot had finished checking all the associated documents. And so checking all the associated documents, that is a type of control action, you could say, or a type of feedback perhaps. I don't want to get in an academic conversation about that today. And flight briefing required prior to the flight. According to the dispatcher's statement, the pilot in command, after being informed of the latest weather condition at destination, requested additional fuel. Okay, yeah, we saw that earlier on. At the time of flight planning, the visibility from TAE4, I can't remember what TAE4 is. What's TAE4? Let's have a look. There it is, terminal weather forecast. There, I should have remembered that. There we go. Terminal weather forecast. Oops, there we go. Was 1,000 metres in smoke, but the dispatcher stated that he received information from the company channel that the actual visibility was below minima. Okay, so their mental model is they know that it is below minima. And I'm just wondering, you know, is there a decision to be made about, well, if you know the destination's already below minima, should you be taking off or should you be going to a diversion airfield? I'm just sort of bringing ideas up there. The pilot in command was informed of the latest weather condition at the destination, hence the request for additional fuel. Yeah, okay. However, it appeared that the information of Polonia Airport's existing weather situation was not thoroughly reviewed. Appeared that existing weather situation was not thoroughly reviewed. Oh, right, okay, so reading that a little bit more carefully then, the dispatcher stated that he received information about the visibility below minima. So this person's mental model was, it's below minima. But the pilot in command was informed of the latest weather condition. However, it appeared that the information of the existing weather situation was not thoroughly reviewed. So the mental model, the process model of the pilot in command may have been deficient. We don't know that, but maybe there's an argument there. This might be influenced by the fact Polonia Airport was not closed. Okay. And the request for additional fuel suggests that the pilot in command was prepared to hold for better visibility required for landing at Polonia. Should the visibility of the airport remain below minima by the time of arrival, all of these were the grounds for the flight to be dispatched. Okay, so that makes sense. So it's suggested that the pilot in command was prepared. We don't know that for certain. And of course, if the airport is not closed when it should be, there could be an assumption that, well, they must think it's fine. Otherwise it would be closed, wouldn't it? Surely it would be closed if it's below minimum. Yeah, okay. So let's move on. So radar vectoring. Let's make it sure it's on the screen so you can see it. So radar vectoring acceptance in instrument meteorological conditions below minimum safe altitude. From the cockpit voice recorder and the flight data recorder data, it was deducted that flight crew had accepted the ATC clearance to descend from flight level 140 to 3,000 feet at 43 nautical miles from NDN VOR DME. When passing 10,000 feet, the pilot in command remarked that they would encounter smoke, and this was agreed by the co-pilot. 15 seconds later, the pilot in command said, "Okay, passing Mora, sector radar vector YAR." At this point, the flight crew indicated their perception that they would be vectored whilst median approach had not explicitly given any instruction for radar vectoring. Okay, so that implies that they might perceive that they'll get radar vectoring when that's not actually been offered. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, the actual radar vectoring from median approach began at the time when median approach gave the instruction was 3,000 feet for an initial left turn onto heading 240. However, the instruction was given using the call sign Merpati 152 instead of Indonesia 152. Therefore, the flight crew did not respond to this instruction. Okay, so you could say that that is a type of contributory control action, in that it, led to a misunderstanding or a loss of time, delay perhaps. So that's a couple of things there. Left hand. Median approach, when asked, then asked the flight crew to affirm the instruction, and the flight crew requested to repeat the instruction. The approach controller, okay, so that's so it's median approach controller. So let's just quickly zoom back over to where we were the other day. Where is it? Is it this one? So we've got median approach control service. Which of these sort of four names? It doesn't sound like these labels match the ones in that section we've just been looking at. So let's just steal one of these, take it over there, and we'll start to draw it. There we go. Where are we? Down there. So we've got median approach approach controller talking to the crew, which is the pilot in command, and what was the other one? Co-pilot. And how is it described down here? So it says the pilot remarked that they would, in command remarked they would encounter smoke, and this was agreed by the co-pilot. 15 seconds later, the pilot in command said, "Okay, passing Mora." At this point, the flight crew indicated their perception. Yeah, okay. The actual radar veteran gave instructions for initial left call sign. Okay, so this described, just sort of briefly, so it talks about flight crew as a group, so it's not specific which crew were listening to the radio or talking on the radio, and that might not be relevant at this stage, but as we go through, it'd be interesting to understand who's talking on the radio, who's doing the flying, and whether there's any misunderstandings amongst those two. So flight crew again, flight crew, approach controller, repeated the instruction using the correct call sign, while omitting the important information of the intended direction from which ILS would be intercepted. Okay, so the first one is, when the aircraft altitude is 3,000 feet, initial left turn. So the intended direction, the left turn bit, is omitted. It's said this time, but it's omitted the second time. While on the assigned heading, but they say, when they say intended direction, is it a combination of whether it's a left or right turn and then the compass direction? So is it, if it's 240 degrees, is it left turn 240 or is it right turn 240? I suppose it depends on the approach direction from the aircraft. Again, I'm sort of talking outside of my area of expertise in that respect. While on the assigned heading, the pilot in command apparently began to show his doubts about his position. He took there we go, look, he took over the radio comms from the pilot not flying. So this is PNF, and that's the captain. Where does it say the captain? It just says PIC. To directly request affirmation 152, heading 235. Confirm, are we clear from the mountainous areas? 152. So that is that bit. 152. Heading 235, which is not quite the same. Confirm, are we clear from the mountainous areas? Okay, and then we've got this. So this is the company basic operation manual on initial approach altitude. So let's just have a look. Is this the same operation manual that the dispatcher is supposed to use? Let's just have a look. So that's a basic operation manual. Is that the same thing? Paste. So it's a different one. Section 442. Company basic operation manual. I'll just delete that bit. Well, I'll leave that in because I'm assuming it's the same document. On initial approach altitude in IMC and radar vectors, states that in accepting these clearances, pilot in command will exercise a full measure of discretion, utilising his knowledge of the terrain over which the clearance takes him, possible consequences of radio or radar failure, his ability to maintain a clear picture of the situation using VOR, ADF facilities, etc., and his experience with the possibly known reputation of the installation and the personnel involved. If there is any doubt about spot heights, etc., and no opportunity to study the charts, clearance should be refused, and the flight falls back on the known safety or minimum sector altitudes. This means that as the pilot in command began to have doubts regarding his position, the flight crew should have, there we go everyone, should have discontinued the approach. Okay, so let's have a little think about avoiding hindsight bias, shall we? Let's just be very careful about that. So they should have discontinued the approach and taken any necessary actions that will bring the aircraft to the minimum sector altitude. However, the flight crew continued the approach while accepting the vectoring. After maiden approach, replied, "Affirm, sir, continue turn left on heading 215. I don't know if it's just me, but that says 235. This is 215, and this one is 240. So is it that clearance has changed because the aircraft is turning and the radar controller can see that? Does it even matter? I'm not sure it really matters. But it says turn left there, so they're supposed to be turning left. Okay, pardon me. 242, radar vectoring practices. So let's zoom in a little bit so you can see better. Based on local radar vectoring guidance and taking into consideration all radar limitation and obstacle clearance, the vectoring process terminates upon intercepting ILS localizer. The radar rotational speed is 5 RPM. Was not suitable for approach control services. Okay. Therefore, the radar return interval was 12 seconds. 12 seconds, that's quite a lot of seconds. This setting was only suitable for en route control purposes. Okay, as it was insufficient to monitor the movements of the aircraft during approach. ICAO Annex 10 stated that the controller must have 4 to 6 second return interval in order to monitor the aircraft lateral movements during approach. Right, so let's just take one of these. Let's put ICAO in there. International Civil Aviation Organization, if I remember correctly. And then ICAO Annex 10 to the Chicago Convention. So that is a requirement. The controller must have 4 to 6 second return interval in order to monitor the aircraft lateral movements during approach. So if I'm just going to, I'll just steal this bit over here and we'll put it down here like this. Alright, so if you have an airport authority and we've got ICAO with Annex 10, and that Annex 10 says controller must have 4 to 6 second return interval in order to monitor the aircraft lateral movements during approach. Okay, so that is a control action of type. So why was that not, was that not sorted out? So let's have a look. Air traffic control operations. So this is provide adequate radar facilities. There we go, and then we'll stick this there just for good measure. That's right. What's this then? It's 12 seconds. 5 RPM and 12 seconds. Radar. What was it called? Local radar vectoring process. Radar return. So I'll just put radar, and this is the airspace. Okay. And they will control the aircraft through radio instructions. There we go. Does that make sense what I've done there? Can you see what I've done? I'm trying to build the structure around the topic of radar requirements and relating it to the physical process. So the airspace and aircraft, they have a sensor, a radar system in this case, that provides updates 5 RPM, 12 seconds to the air traffic control operations, and they provide radio instructions. And I'm hoping it's kind of obvious that clearly if there's a lag in this loop, either in receiving feedback or providing instructions, that lag could have very real world consequences. So of course you want a tight, a rapid control loop as you can, really high performance. But there are trade-offs, which I'm sure. Well, I won't go into those, but I'm sure you might be aware of some trade-offs with the type of radar equipment and things like that. Confirm adequate. So this one here, I'm just putting for logical conclusion. So confirm adequacy or not of equipment, radar, facilities. It is, I can't spell, there we go. Yeah, so I'll put those two in there. So I'm just closing that loop and saying, excuse me, presumably airport authorities provide adequate radar facilities, in inverted commas. What does adequate mean? They're supposed to provide adequate radar facilities, but they apparently haven't in this case. So why is that? And then, of course, the air traffic control operations, they have a logical need to provide feedback that says, hey, our radar facilities are adequate or not. And have they done that? Did they do that? Was it ignored or didn't they do that? So there's an avenue of inquiry there to think about. Okay, so let's, we talked to death about that, so let's keep moving. So the radar controller, radar controller. So I could expand this box here and call them the radar controller. There we go. I'll just move that up here. In fact, no, I'll leave it down there. That'll do. Right. The radar controller did not apply the standard instrument approach procedure. Oh dear. That's a candidate contributory control action. And this is a standard instrument approach procedure which will require the aircraft to fly overhead median VOR. He preferred to vector GA152 using the right pattern of the footprint of the east approach gate to provide lateral separation with the departing aircraft. Furthermore, it will expedite the aircraft to intercept ILS localizer from the right side. Therefore, the approaching GA152 was vectored to turn heading 240 to intercept ILS from the right, while the outgoing aircraft was cleared to turn left after takeoff. So they've got two aircraft going on there. So we've got, let's have a look. We've got, was it GA152? Yeah, and then we've got BO683. BO683, GA152. Nope, no, not like that. GA152 radar controller, looking after both of them. So they're providing radio instructions to GA152 and receiving radar information from them. And they're also providing instructions to BO683. There we go, and presumably getting radar feedback from them. So I'm just going to stretch that like so. There we go. Let's have a look. Yeah, so two main charts. Actually, let's put let's put this here. What was it? Standard instrument departure procedure. I'm adding that because it might be relevant later on. It might not be, but I'm going to stick it in there anyway while I'm there. So standard instrument approach procedure, not departure procedure, Simon. Approach. There we go. Standard instrument approach procedure. Fantastic. Right, so the two main charts used as a controller reference were the localizer footprint and minimum vectoring altitude charts. The radar equipment manufacturer developed the charts for the purposes of the installation of the radar facility of Medan. These charts were used by the local airport authority and published locally. The charts were not published in AIC or AIP. Right, so AIC and AIP, if I remember correctly, AIP is Aeronautical Information Publication. Oh, there it is, yeah, and AIC is Aeronautical Information Circular. And it wasn't published in those. Okay, so is that relevant? Do I need to make a note of that? I think it might be relevant a little bit. Maybe it's adding a bit too much detail to the control structure model, but we'll add it anyway, because it's all, you know, when we're building control structure models, we don't necessarily know what we don't know as we're moving along. We're learning as we're moving along. So it just makes sense just to capture it. And then if we need to delete it, remove it, omit it, we can. You know, that's the beauty of abstraction. You know, trying to model a complex system, we don't have to model everything. You know, we model what's relevant to our avenue of inquiry and what's relevant to the audience we're trying to communicate with. So minimum vectoring altitude vectoring, MVA charts. And then there's a radar equipment manufacturer developed the charts for the purpose of the installation of the facility. These charts were used by local airport authority and published locally. Charts were not published in AIC and AIP. AIC, AIP documents. Okay, so let's put these over here. And we can think about those later on. The localizer footprint was designed to provide a safe area where the controller can vector an aircraft at altitudes due to 2,000 feet. Okay, so this, before we sort of move forward, the localizer footprint and minimum vector altitude charts, they are models of a type. You know, they contain essentially a model of the real world. And that model is used to inform other controllers, in this case the air traffic controller, so that they can vector aircraft at altitudes, in this case down to 2,000 feet, so pretty low down. Had flight GA152 turned right onto a heading of 046 degrees at the time of the instruction, it may have remained within this designated area. So it didn't stay in that designated area. Even when the controller issued the left turn instruction, such a turn would have placed the aircraft back in the footprint within a short period of time. The FDR data revealed the fact that GA152 trajectory went out of the safe vectoring area footprint. Yeah, okay, so it was outside that area. The MVA chart, so that's a different chart, minimum vectoring altitude chart, used in Meedham was found to be inaccurate. Okay, and although not displayed on the radar display, it was available for use by the air traffic controllers. It indicates the minimum altitude that can be used in an emergency and shall provide a minimum 1,000 feet clearance above the highest object in a given area. The areas were constructed in a way that provides minimum different altitudes within a radius of 60 nautical miles of median VOR. This methodology results in several of the altitudes being... That's not good. That's not good at all. The MVA chart was not displayed on the radar screen, but was displayed at the radar console for the controller reference. This chart was found to be in gross error in that it showed a safe height of 1,500 feet in an area of initial impact. The height at this point was found to be approximately 1,400 feet. Oh my gosh. That's just unreal. So yeah, so thinking about that, what is the control structure involved in the creation and validation and maintenance of that particular chart? Because it's providing unsafe information to the air traffic controller. Of course, we don't know at this stage yet because we've not got that far, but we don't know yet whether that incorrect chart had any impact on the decisions of the air traffic controller. It may well not have done, but it still has the potential to contribute to a catastrophic accident and should be investigated and dealt with appropriately. If an aircraft proceeds outside the prescribed area, it must be climbed in accordance with the safe sector altitude as depicted in the minimum sector altitude diagram of the appropriate AIP Aeronautical Information Publication documentation chart, or in the case of an emergency in accordance with the MVA chart. In this occurrence, the SSA was 9,500 feet and the MVA was 1,500 feet, which should have been 2,500 feet. Oh, dearie me. Not good. Not good at all. Not good at all. Oh dear. Right, okay. Yeah. Okay, so the next section is situational awareness, section 2.5, then crew resource management, then approach controller, then flight automation, GPWS, conversion training approval. Okay, so I'm just going to have a little break there. Would you like to stick some comments or ask some questions in the chat while I just have a quick drink? And then we'll jump right into situational awareness. Fantastic. Let's keep going then. So situational awareness. I hope you can read that okay. Let me zoom in a bit more so you can see it better. There we go. Situational awareness. Pilot flying's expectations. About 19 seconds after the transmission using the Mapati call sign. Mapati 152, U-turn left heading 240, vectoring for ILS runway 05. From the right side, traffic now about rolling. The ATC queries GA152. to affirm the previous instruction. Indonesia 152, do you read? The flight crew responded by requesting to repeat the instruction. The instruction was then repeated, but a crucial part of the early instruction was omitted. The omitted instruction was intended to vector the flight to capture the ILS approach to runway 05 from the right side. OK, turn left heading 235 now. Vectoring for ILS runway 05. The approach controller changed the heading. There we go, that explains it. Apparently because GA152 was already too close to the MDN VOR, and hence the approach controller wanted GA152 to make a tighter heading change. Excuse me. It should be noted that the approach control common practice for visual and ILS interception for east traffic was to vector the aircraft to the east gate, so Appendix E and Figure 1, to intercept localizer of the ILS of runway 05 from the right side. In fact, actually, let's just do that. Let's just move that to one side. There we go, let's put that to the other side so we can see. Zoom out a little bit. Oh, I don't know if I'm going to be able to do this, whether it'll look good on the screen for you or not. I'm not sure it's going to, is it? No, I don't think it is. Right, well, let's just make that full screen and make that full screen. Right, so what is it? Appendix E. Appendix E and Figure 1. Right, let's have a look. Appendix E. Oh, there's Figure 1, look, there we go. So this is the, you can zoom in a bit so you can see. So this is Figure 1 localizer footprint chart. This is the east gate. So east. And there's the runway just there. And then Appendix E. Let's have a look. Where's Appendix E? Don't crash on me now, Miro, come on. Yeah, I think we've upset Miro. Of course we have. Let's check the chat. Rowan, good job, Simon. Thanks, Rowan. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Oh, no, it's woken up again. There we go. Fantastic. Let's move. Oh, is it going to slow down and crash again? No, come on. Come on, come on. Figure 29. Appendices. Right, what was it? Appendix F, wasn't it? No. Appendix E. That one. Let's move down here, have a look. Oh, Appendix B is after Appendix C. Why is that? That can't be right, surely. Oh no, it's like that in the document. I shouldn't change that. There we go. Page 87 is Appendix C. Page 88 is Appendix B. There we go, great. Appendix D. Appendix E. Where's Appendix E? Where is it? Why haven't we got an Appendix E? Where's Appendix E gone? We don't seem to have it, everybody. Why don't we have an Appendix E? That's strange. The only explanation I can have is it's in the wrong order in the source document, which doesn't look like it is. It's not. Unless that's what it is. Approach radar vectoring guidance. Approach, yeah, it's that. Right, okay. So Appendix E is listed as Appendix C. There we go. That'll confuse people. It's confused me. I don't know if it's confused you, but it's confused me. Right. Yeah. Okay. Let's have a look. So Appendix C. Yeah. Oh, my brain's going to hurt. I don't understand. There's two C's. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Let's just have a look. Right, so this is the approach radar vectoring guidance for visual ILS interception. Yes, it is difficult to read. It's not just you. Yeah, let's not look at that now. Procedures of coordination, Medan approach and Polonia Tower. Approach radar, get vectoring. Okay. Don't know, not sure. Doesn't quite make sense. To intercept localizer of ILS runway 05 from the right side. The standard ILS approach to runway 05, however, was to fly overhead, Medan VOR, turning left onto heading 226 up to 6.6 nautical miles, and then turn left onto heading 076 for ILS intercept from the left side of the approach path to runway 05. So let's just have a look at figure 4 then. Where's figure 4? There we go, look. So there's figure 4. I can't pretend I understand these charts, so if you do, you're welcome to comment. I think this is what's describing the left-hand turn, left-hand approach. Yeah, okay. Right, so previously at 06:27:29, the co-pilot commented, overhead, Dulu Nikapt. We go overhead first, Captain. And replied by the pilot in command, Mungkin Ya, perhaps. The co-pilot apparently expected that the approach controller would vector GA152 over the VOR first, before vectoring the flight to capture the localizer. The pilot in command seemed to agree. So co-pilot, pilot in command, apparently they'd vector overhead first before vectoring the flight to capture the localizer. So they were anticipating a left-hand turn, which they got. But it seemed like it was provided earlier than they'd expected. This predicted vectoring approach pattern and incomplete instruction could have led to a possible misunderstanding of the pilot in command concerning air traffic controller's intention, i.e. an ILS radar vectoring approach to intercept the runway 05 from the right side. So the controller's intention is to intercept from the right side. So that was, where's the diagram? Yeah, this side. So it sounds, and I'm probably wrong because I'm not an expert in this, it seems to imply that the crew were expecting to go over the VOR and then do that. But the intention of the controller was the opposite, I think. I think that's what it's describing. I'm probably wrong. You can tell me to shut up if you like. Right, there we go. Let's have a look. So, upon receiving the clearance to turn into heading 235, pilot in command wondered why the controller vectored the flight so far away, possibly from the expected approach pattern by the approach controller. Ja Amat, which means why so far. It may indicate the pilot in command's possible perception of his position that he'd already passed overhead MDN VOR. Pilot in command then instructed the co-pilot to extend the slats as the aircraft slowed down. From this it can be inferred that the pilot in command might not have realised that the controller's intended approach pattern was different than what he expected. Okay, so when we're talking in terms of stamp, STPA and CAS, we talk about the controller's process model or mental model if we're talking about a human being, or if we're using standard language, you could say the controller's belief. So in this case, we've got two controllers. We've got the air traffic controller and their beliefs, their process model, their mental model of the aircraft, the airspace, and the task that they're performing. And then the pilot in command and the co-pilot have their own process model, mental model beliefs about what they expect to do and what they've been asked to do. And of course, if there's a bit of a difference between the two, you know, something's going on that doesn't quite match their understanding, then they may elect to raise a question and take some action. Or if they've been asked to do something which fits with their belief, which might be completely wrong, they might be quite happy to accept that and continue. So this is quite an interesting sort of recognition that, you know, as this says situational awareness, what we say in STAMP, in STPA and CAST is, what is the mental model? What are the beliefs of the controller? And if there are different beliefs or misunderstandings, you know, lack of coordination of the update of those beliefs across the different controllers in the control structure, that can often contribute to the provision of unsafe control actions, contributory control actions that then lead to an accident, which it sounds like that's what we're dealing with here. In fact, I'm quite sure that's what this is. They have a different mental model to what the air traffic controller has, and that's not making sense to them. At 6:28:52, the pilot in command took over radio communication by transmitting 152 heading 235, confirm, are we clear from the mountainous area? The pilot in command was apparently feeling uneasy about the terrain ahead of his vectored path, so we asked the approach controller if they were clear from the mountainous area, presumably northwest of the airport. The approach controller affirmed that they were clear and asked to continue left turn to heading 215 to make a tighter turn. Affirmed, sir. Continue turn left on heading 215. So let's just quickly jump over to the diagrams that show the flight path. Just bear with me a second. There we go, look. So this is the flight path. They're coming in. Let me get a bigger pen so you can see. They're coming. No, that's not the colour. Let's zoom in a bit. So they're coming in from this direction. They've been given a left turn, which they've, you know, that's what they've followed there. You can see, oh, there we go, look, yeah. So the airport, so this is 0523. It'd be nice if they put a northerly arrow on this map. I suspect that this is the northerly direction. Yeah, that's about 5 degrees, isn't it? Yeah, so that's northerly direction. So they're coming at it from this direction. And when it says clear from the mountainous area, presumably northwest of the airport, we're sort of talking this area here, but then there's mountainous area here. That doesn't quite make sense. I think I might be misunderstanding it, but let's keep moving. Fundamentally, the issue here is their beliefs, their mental models are different, and there's a bit of an inconsistency that they seem to be aware of, but it's whether they can recover that in time to prevent an accident, which clearly they couldn't. GA152 flight crew affirmed the instruction to maintain 215 degrees, while at that point FDR data showed the aircraft was flown on heading 225 degrees, which was the normal heading outbound for an instrument landing intercept of runway 05. Note that 046 was about 180 degrees either way of heading 225, the latter being the heading maintained by the pilot in command. At 06:30:04, the controller instructed GA152 to turn right heading 046, and this was acknowledged by the co-pilot. So turn right, acknowledged by the co-pilot, so that's feedback to the air traffic controller, although with different heading 040. Upon receiving the instruction, pilot in command instructed the co-pilot for flap 8 position, so that is a control action from the pilot in command to the co-pilot, provide flap 8 position. This indicated the pilot's intention to continue to land. At 6:30:33, the co-pilot observed the aircraft was turning left and reminded the pilot in command to turn to the right. Turn right. Unsure of the turn direction, pilot in command again took over the communication at 6:30:35, asking the ATC to confirm the instruction turn to the right. Indonesia 152, confirm turning left or turning right, heading 046. ATC confirmed the instruction was to turn right. Yeah, so the co-pilot had the right belief, apparently. Yeah, there, turn right. Turn right, okay, yeah. The pilot in command, apparently still uncertain about their exact position and the approach controller's planned vectoring pattern, seemed to be using his perceptions of his relative position as the basis for his flying. It also seemed that the pilot in command did not recognise the indications that the events were not developing as anticipated. Now, just a point on that. So it might appear as an outsider looking in and looking from the future with the benefit of hindsight. It seemed that the pilot in command did not recognise the indications that the events were not developing as anticipated. It may be that in the head of that pilot in command, maybe things were developing perfectly fine in line with what he's thinking. You know, we have to be open to the potential that they might be getting clues on the flight deck based on their experience that everything is okay. But likewise, you know, like it says, there are indications that things are not developing as anticipated. But what other evidence could we collect from that? What other thoughts could we have about that? And again, this is one of the, you know, goes without saying, it's obvious. When you're doing an investigation, if you don't have the people to to talk to and interview, of course, this is going to be really challenging. So we have to be careful about what we postulate versus what we've got evidence for. He sought information that confirmed his apparent understanding. So he sought information, so he's taking action to do that, and or perceived expectations of the approach path, i.e. to intercept the ILS from the left side, which is the normal ILS approach to runway 05, and avoid information or test whose outcome could disconfirm it. 252, distraction from flight path monitoring duties. The CVR cockpit voice recorder revealed that at 6:20:20 seconds or 1 minute and 17 seconds before the first tree impact, the pilot in command felt that the cockpit was too hot, and he requested a co-pilot to check the air conditioning setting. Right, so just picking up on that for a minute. When we're doing the causal scenario analysis as part of the STPA hazard analysis, step 4 it's called in the literature, or if we're doing the controller analysis as part of cast accident analysis, this is something we might want to pick up on as part of that. So let me just go down here. Let's just pull this bit. Let's pull this over here. There we go. So you can see I've just put MEDAN approach controller there just over the top, just to sort of emphasize the different labels. Got pilot in command, co-pilot, pilot not flying, they're under there like that. Now, of course, they are in control of their aircraft. So let's just take one of the, no, let's not do that, Simon. Let's take that duplicate. Oh, why is it not working? Come on. Duplicate, there we go. Look. So this could be GA152 flight path. There we go. So the pilot in command, he's flying the aircraft and he's receiving information back from the aircraft. And that aircraft is also providing information back to the co-pilot. And then of course they are both talking to the radar controller, and the pilot in command keeps taking over that task from the pilot not flying. Now, when we were analysing the reasons why unsafe control actions are provided, as part of STPA step 4, we explore the control loop, and we look at, in this case, the first part is looking at the controller itself. So what effects upon the controller or influences on the controller might explain why certain unsafe control actions or contributory control actions are provided. And so when we're talking about the environment of the cockpit too hot, that is something that we might explore, whether it's really relevant and pertinent. I'm not saying it is in this case, I'm just sort of giving you some food for thought for when you're doing this kind of analysis. Okay, so it was hot. There we go. Right. At 6:30:33 seconds, or 11 seconds after the request, presumably after checking the air conditioning setting at the overhead panel, co-pilot realised the aircraft was turning left instead of right. At 06:30:02 and reminded the pilot in command to turn right. The pressure altitude of the aircraft at that time was 2,302 feet. At 06:30:44, the co-pilot reported the temperature was cool. This perceived problem with the air conditioning system took precious several seconds from the available time. This had added workload on the crew at a critical time, which distracted the crew's attention from the aircraft trajectory. Yeah, so there's an implication there. But also, there are implications here for other systems, human-machine interface designs, and the potential to distract the crew when performing critical tasks. I don't know, like trying to hunt through menus on a touchscreen in your car to turn the temperature up or down, or turn the volume down or off. These are all known things, why we keep designing vehicles and aircraft like that, Anyway, altitude awareness. So communications from 6:30:35 until the initial impact were focused on the direction of turn after being reminded by the co-pilot as the pilot not flying. At 6:30:35, the pilot in command queried median approach whether the turn was to the left or to the right onto heading 046 degrees. Indonesia 152 confirmed turning left or turning right heading 046. Median approach confirmed that the turn was to the right, which was acknowledged by the pilot in command. So at this point he now knows that he should be turning to the right. At 06:30:51, median approach requested confirmation of the direction of turn because, according to the controller during the interview, the radar return points on the display showed the aircraft turning to the left. So the radar display showed that the aircraft was turning to the left. 152, confirm you are making turning left now. At this point, FDR data shows that the aircraft was passing 2,000 feet. The pilots were apparently preoccupied with the aircraft's horizontal position that they did not monitor the altitude of the aircraft and did not recognise that they were about to descend below the assigned altitude. Okay, so talking about the controllers, let's just go back down here. So we've got the pilot in command, they have a mental model, process model, beliefs, and then the co-pilot has a mental model, process model, or beliefs. Now, if they are, if they are focusing on monitoring horizontal position and direction, and they're not monitoring the altitude, clearly that can have some very serious implications. So why would it make sense for them to behave that way? What else was going on in the cockpit? Well, we've already said that the temperature was a bit of a problem. We've highlighted that time was getting short, in terms of their flight path and how close they were getting to terrain. But are there any other things that might have contributed to that? We haven't got to it yet, but I'm thinking, well, is the autopilot implicated in here? Is the autopilot controlling the altitude? And is there a deviation in that? Is there an issue with that? So let's continue and see where we go. Yeah, okay, so we talked about that. Right, so at 6:30:54, The CVR recorded the pilot saying affirm, but this was not transmitted to Meaden approach. Okay, so that bit of feedback to Meaden approach is effectively lost, not transmitted. There we go. The pilot then transmitted, we are turning right now at 6:30:56. It's not quite clear what was meant with turning right now, whether it was time or space wise. The approach controller apparently understood this as time wise because he then gave a further instruction to continue turn left. So if they were already turning left and they transmit to say, yeah, we're turning right now, and then the approach controller says to continue turning left. Yeah, okay. I think you can see what's going on here. This is about coordination of control actions and the time lags in the control loops. And of course, there's more time lost due to these issues with issues with language and vocabulary and some basic mistakes with some of the call signs and compass bearings and things like that. Which again, I'm using the word mistake not in the human factors analysis sense. I'm just saying it as a general. They've clearly said the wrong thing in the case of the air traffic controller, and then they're trying to recover the situation. Okay, so continue turn left, sir. 9 seconds later. At that time, the FDR data shows that the aircraft was turning right. Pilot in command then answered they were turning right. Confirm turning left. We are start turning right now, and reduce the right roll angle. There was a communication between them, miscommunication between them. At 6:31:13, the approach controller replied, okay. Apparently starting to realise the developing situation. It was not until 18 seconds later that the approach controller gave another instruction to continue turning right. So they say they're turning right. Do you want us to continue turning left? Even though the air traffic controller had said turn left. Which coincided with the heading toward the initial impact with the tree. Within that period, FDR data shows the pilot increased the right roll angle again following the co-pilot's light suggestion. The communications concerning the turn directions took place while the aircraft continued descending below the cleared altitude of 2,000 feet. The flight crew might have been so focused on the aircraft's horizontal position and overlooked indications from other flight instruments. Such mental state seems to be enhanced particularly under conditions of high stress and high workload. At 06:31:27, the co-pilot said, descend, most probably because he had suddenly observed that the aircraft was below 2,000 feet. The FDR recorded increases in the pitch attitude following this event, most probably as a result of the pilot's altitude correction effort, until the aircraft struck the trees 5 seconds later and ultimately crashed. So this was, in terms of time and space, it was all very, very narrow and very difficult for them to deal with. Fantastic. Okay, let's just have a look at the clock. So it's 16:19 and we've got quite a few pages to go. Let's have a think. Should we keep going until we... Yeah, we'll do section 2.6, see how we feel, and then if we want to continue, we will. Otherwise, we'll call it a break, pull stumps, and we'll reconvene another day. Are there any questions, comments, concerns, anything like that? Stick it in the chat. I'll just have a quick drink. Just seen a comment from Claudio. Hello, Claudio. Great to see you. Thank you very much. I really appreciate it. If you've got any experience you'd like to share, please stick it in the chat. It's great to see you. Great to have you here. Okay, so crew resource management. Let's have a talk about this then. So this is this about air traffic controller crew resource management, or is it only in the context of the air crew themselves? I think it's just air crew in this case. So there we go then. So inter-crew communication problem. At 6:30:04, the ATC gave an instruction to turn right, heading 046. Report established localizer. This instruction was acknowledged by the co-pilot but read back at a different heading. Pardon me. Turn right, heading 040, Indonesia 152, check established. The FDR data showed that at this point the aircraft was turning to the left. Okay, there we go. This could be an indication of cockpit crew communication breakdown. The CVR transcript further showed that apparently the pilot in command had different perception regarding the relative aircraft's position with the co-pilot, but this situation was not communicated to each other. So again, talking about mental models, beliefs, process models, if there is a difference in those and the people involved don't recognise that, that can set things up for disaster, as in this case. As a result, there were occasions where the pilot in command, as the pilot flying, took over pilot not flying's duty of handling communication to reconfirm ATC instructions. Okay. I mean, I can't really sort of comment apart from, I think it mentions earlier on that the pilot not flying, the co-pilot, was not quite as experienced as the pilot in command, but not that much difference. Interesting. Adherence to standard operating procedures. The general impression based on CVR recording was that the autopilot was programmed to descend to a new altitude and then pretty much left to get on with the task. That impression may not have been an accurate reflection of what the pilots were doing. They may have been properly monitoring autopilot event in all three dimensions rather than reacting to them, but there was little or no dialogue about altitude to indicate that it was indeed being actively monitored. Okay, the flight crew's standard operating procedure was elaborated in the Garuda A300 flight crew operation manual. Right, so let's just grab this one over here. Where is it? That one there. Now you'll notice that I'm capturing this as a yellow block. And I'm not saying whether it's a controller or not, because let me just write it down. Let me write it down, then I'll explain what I'm talking about. So A300 flight crew operation manual FCOM. Okay, so I'm capturing that as a black box, a yellow box with black lines. I'm not saying that this is a controller, because technically it's not. It's just a manual. It can't influence or control anything until a human being, or in the future, computers and AI and all that other great stuff. A human being picks it up, sticks it in their brain, practices it, drills it until it becomes a control algorithm, decision making, or it becomes part of their mental model, process model, or beliefs. So decision making or beliefs. So on its own, it's not a controller. However, it does contain some limitations and some elements of decision making that the crew has to take on board and embed in their minds and practice and drill. So I'm just highlighting it here as a yellow box. I may elect to include it in the control structure model just to say, hey, there are these manuals and those manuals need to be correct, because if they contain faulty information or poor decision making, poor information that's wrong or bad or whatever, that can obviously influence the controllers, the pilots, the aircrew. And of course, if that's the case, then we would explore the control structure of that manual. So how does it get created? How does it get agreed and signed off? Is it the same content as used on all the aircraft across the company, or is it used across, the fleet of aircraft for a particular manufacturer? And if it's incorrect, then, how does that get dealt with, or how does that get detected and prevented? So I'm just sort of stretching your mind a bit about the things you might want to think about including in the control structure model for your benefit as the modeler. I'm not talking about an academic exercise here. I'm hoping that a lot of the stuff you see and learn from me, it's not about, being absolutely academic and specific about using these methods. I'm talking about using these methods to help you as the analyst, as the modeler, to make sense of the problems you're trying to solve and then help you to solve them. And if you decide you want to include things in a control structure model to help your audience understand what you're trying to explain, then so be it. But generally you wouldn't include documentation and procedures in a control structure model. But I'm doing it just for the narrative effect, if you like. And again, this is a preliminary control structure I'm putting together. It's not a final control structure that would go in a formal report. It's to help me as the analyst, the modeler, and the teacher to help develop ideas and help others. If that makes sense. Right, so the FCOM stated that if the autopilot is engaged, the pilot flying shall announce any change in aircraft configuration, and the pilot non-flying shall confirm the changes from the flight mode annunciator. The cockpit voice recorder recording showed that this procedure was not performed during the approach phase. Okay, that's somewhat interesting. The pilot flying did not read out autopilot modes from the FMA, and the pilot non-flying did not check or confirm the altitude set on the FCU. Okay, so they could be arguably considered contributory control actions, but we need to know a bit more first before we start judging those control actions. There was no dialogue between the two pilots regarding altitude changes or altitude settings on the FCU. When a climb or descent was required, the pilot flying dialed up the required altitude on the FCU and little more was said. This is not to say that the pilot not flying was not checking what the pilot flying was doing, only that there was no evidence to show that he was checking. Okay. The pilot not flying did not make calls for level changes, such as leaving or reaching flight levels. The CVR transcript also showed that no such calls were made since the initiation of the descent. Only once did pilot flying call out any height monitoring during the descent when he said passing minimum off route altitude. There were no other routine calls such as passing 10,000 feet or 1,000 feet to go as a cleared altitude was approaching. Consistent adherence to the SOP in this case could have increased the flight crew situation awareness and would have provided additional safety defence. Again, like I said, just being a little bit mindful and careful about hindsight bias and saying things could and would when that's not what happened in this case and we don't necessarily know or understand why. So Pandolfo, Claudio says, great Simon, thanks Claudio. Okay, so let's have a look, where are we? So we're 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 pages from the end of this section. It's now 16:29. Should we call it an evening and reconvene? I think that'd be a good idea. Okay, so I just want to say thank you very much for your attention today. I really appreciate it. I know it can be a bit challenging digging through investigation reports, and it's not always the most exciting, interesting thing. But it's important to, the reason I recommend doing it like this when you're trying to build your skills, your thinking skills, your modelling skills, your analysis skills using STAMP, STPA or CAST, I think this is a good idea because it helps you to take time and critically assess not only what's written in the investigation report, but what is the intent behind it, and perhaps what other avenues of inquiry you might want to consider as part of if you were doing a stamp-based analysis. Like I said, the flight crew operation manual, for example, we don't know yet whether that's implicated in this particular accident or not, and I'm getting the impression it probably isn't. But at least when we're looking through the investigation, looking through the information, we can start to think, well, we've got this operations manual. We don't necessarily know at this stage whether it's contributed to the incident, the accident or not. But what might the control structure look like to make sure that the content of that manual is good to go? And I suppose that's one of the main sort of things I want to leave you with. Thinking about things through the concept of a control loop, a jigsaw piece, and then thinking about, well, what is the context of this loop? How does it fit in to the overall control structure model or the overall jigsaw puzzle? That can help unlock questions which wouldn't necessarily come to mind. It'd unlock potentially non-trivial questions for you to then investigate. But anyway, I hope you enjoyed that. I'll see you on the next one. Thank you very much for watching. Take care.